flowers.
Next one.
The Spanish explorer Ponce de Leon gave this name to the wilderness we call Florida. His was the first attempt to colonize and establish missions in Florida, but it was a group of French Huguenot settlers on the northeastern Florida coast that discovered, among the lush vegetation, an abundance of flourishing grapevines. It was from this chosen fruit, the native muscadine, that the first American wine was fermented, more than a century and a half before grapevines were planted in California. The pioneers of the mid-1800s also found in Florida a land rich in natural resources. The Central Florida Ridge, distinguished by its rolling terrain and abundance of lakes, quickly established itself as an agricultural base. In addition to citrus and tomatoes, this region emerged as a center of commercial viticulture, at one time supporting more than 4,000 acres of vineyards. These early attempts, however, involved non-native grapes introduced by European settlers, and the vines were unable to withstand the intense pressure of Florida's semi-tropical environment. Florida's grape potential lay in the development of adaptive bunch grapes and improved varieties of the native muscadine. It is this winemaking heritage we now invite you to share. A heritage rich in history, in tradition, in family. We welcome you to Lakeridge Winery. Seeking to reestablish wine growing in Central Florida, and inspired by his family's agricultural history, and his father's locks chose the Central Florida Ridge to establish Lakeridge Winery and Vineyards.
Both of my grandparents were in agriculture. They farmed in Gadsden County, which is a little bit to the west of Tallahassee. A good number of my uncles also were in agriculture, and early on I ran one of the farms for an uncle of mine for several years before I went back into construction with my dad, and then ultimately back to school and majored in accounting. So I did that for a pretty good while too. And my father, even though he was in the construction industry, he did make some wines as I was a kid on a fairly regular basis. I had tried some of his wines, wasn't too impressed, but he liked it, and so that was fine. Everybody ought to be able to drink what they like to drink. We think we're doing a better job now than perhaps he did, but we probably got a lot better equipment now than he had too. Charles, my son, had started off early on helping me some in a little vineyard that I was doing just to see how bad I'd messed that up. Probably doesn't hurt to have a little place where you try it out first and see if it's going to work for you. He worked there for me some in the vineyard on weekends and so forth, and then as we started off our winery in Tallahassee, called Lafayette Vineyards, he was out there sitting on a tractor most all the summers, mowing through the vineyard or doing other jobs in the vineyard. It's been a joy to work in the winery with him, as well as the other employees that we have here that all form a team, and without that kind of a team that we've had, it would have been impossible to do what we've done here. When we came down to this area, we looked at a good number of areas around here, and there was a lot of land for sale at that point in time, having been frozen out in the citrus freezes. And this one, where you had the view across the top of this hill, not only was it something that we felt would be good for growing grapes, but it also was a nice, pleasant place to work too. So that helped a lot in terms of figuring out where we wanted to actually locate our winery. Certainly what the advantage of the wine business, as far as I'm concerned, is we get to see our customers come in. They go through our tour. We show people a lot about how wine is made, how we're making wine. They get a free tasting that lets them try our wines. And then if it's something that pleases them, then we get to see a customer go out very pleased with the purchase that they've made. That didn't happen quite that way in the CPA business.
The way I remember us starting the wine business was a little different than how my father remembers it. I believe I was about 13 years old, and he woke my mother and sister and I up one morning and said, "This weekend we're going to plant a vineyard." And we all kind of scratched our heads and looked around and thought, okay, he's finally lost his mind. And he already had about 5-acre little place picked out right beside our house, and that's what we did that weekend, is we planted that vineyard. And little did we know that was just the test vineyard of what was to come a few years later, when we actually purchased the property and did the first winery in Tallahassee, which was Lafayette. As you walk through the wine shop, especially at the end of the tour when people are doing the wine tasting, which is everybody's favorite part, they've gone through the whole process of how wine is made throughout the entire year. They've learned about it. We've educated them on the differences in Florida wines compared to wines from other parts of the world. And then you see the smiles on their faces when they've tasted that one that's their favorite, and they look at the person next to them and they say, "Oh boy, that was a good one, huh?" And we make a lot of different wines, and we realize that everybody doesn't like the same things. And that's one of the reasons that we've got the diversity of the products, ranging from dry to sweet, red and white, cream sherry, a port, a sparkling wine. And we have to do that. Everybody likes something different, and we understand that. And it is really a pleasure when you see somebody happy with what they've just tasted, and they're going to enjoy it and remember the experience that they had here, whether they're back home or experiencing that perfect bottle of wine with friends. It's just nice. And we survey a lot of the customers that come through, and I like reading a lot of those surveys. It's a pleasure when you read the comment section and somebody says, "I've been to wineries all over the world and had the best time and learned the most here." It's a nice feeling.
Establishing a vineyard is a labor-intensive task. Once the land is properly prepared, posts and wire, the framework of the vineyard trellis, must be set and an irrigation system provided to supply needed moisture.
When we start out to establish a vineyard, then we first lay out where we would like to have it. We put down the post, and the irrigation system is established. Then we plant the plants. There's a good number of steps along that where you train the plant up along the trellis, and making sure that you have the foundation for where you'll ultimately have your vineyard. We use a drip irrigation system, and also on some varieties we use a micro spray. Both of those are designed to use very small amounts of water. In fact, in terms of our conservation efforts, we use probably something less than 1/10 the amount that if this land had home sites on it. So we feel that we're being good conservators of the natural resources that we do have here in Florida. We are fortunate that the types of grapes that we grow, we don't have to use insecticides. We found that even when you start getting some insects in the vineyard, that if you can leave it alone long enough, something else that likes to eat whatever's in there will come along and take care of that problem.
The growing season starts in March with bud break. This is a crucial period during which a late spring frost could reduce the vine's yield. Central Florida's warm spring days and nights combine with gentle lake breezes to moderate daily temperatures and promote drying of the leaf canopy, thus enhancing vine growth and fruit development. By July, the grapes are approaching the harvest window.
As we come into the harvest season, our winemaker is analyzing the grapes almost daily, and tells us when those grapes are at the ultimate point to be able to pick and process. And we do use a mechanical harvester. It goes over straddling the rows, shakes off the grapes, and very quickly we have them back, so we're processing them just as quickly as we can get them out of the field. They go from that point on that sheep completely takes over, and we all have a sigh of relief that we've gotten everything out of the field and got it where we can take care of it a whole lot better than what we do with having to conform to whatever nature gives us out here.
Once the grapes arrive at the winery, they are weighed, inspected, tested, and undergo careful scrutiny by the winemaker. The fruit is then destemmed and crushed into a must, which is pumped into presses. This pressing system gently squeezes the grapes to remove the juice.
They're crushed and pressed for whites. The reds are fermented on the skins for a couple of days before they're actually pressed off the skins. We both inoculate and add a source of sugar to the grape juice, after which time it is fermented for about 6 weeks. After that, we go through a process of gravity settling. We pull all the clear wine off of the sediments that settle off from the fermentation, process called racking. After the racking has occurred a couple of times and the wine is visually cleared up, it goes through 2 other processes, one of them called cold stabilization and the other one fining, which helps to remove additional components from the wine that cause clouding or sediment formation. After that, the wine is pretty much settled in the tanks until we're ready to bottle. At that point, we will actually do some finishing operations. We add back a certain sweetness level depending on our different brands. The wines are then filtered through a pad-type filtration to remove any yeast or microorganisms. They go through a membrane filter right before they're bottled, and the wines are then bottled and stored in the warehouse ready for shipping. There's a myriad of testing that goes on throughout the lifetime of the wine to ensure its quality. So each tank is tested any number of times through the fermentation and throughout the processing before bottling, as well as after the wine is put into the bottle. So each tank will have a history, basically from its inception here at the winery to the time that it's bottled and leaves the winery. Sparkling wines start out as a regular table wine. They go through an initial fermentation. After the initial fermentation, they are bottled. More yeast is added, more sugar is added in a very precise amount. They are fermented in a closed container for about 6 weeks, which basically keeps the CO2 in the bottle, and that creates the sparkle or the bubbles. After the fermentation is complete, we have recently entered into a new process where we're adding encapsulated yeast to the bottle. So the traditional riddling process is not necessary, where the bottles are actually turned and twisted on a frame in order to work the yeast sediment into the neck. Now with these encapsulated yeast, you simply invert the bottle neck down, and all the little yeast beads just settle to the neck of the bottle where they can be expelled from the bottle. When we're ready to finish the sparkling wine and ready it for the market, we go through a disgorging process, which basically opens the bottle, expels the yeast. We then add the finishing ingredients, the sweetener, to get the level of sweetness we want. We apply the cork and the wire hood, and then the bottles are, of course, labeled, and they sit for about a month before we send them out to market.
This painstaking process is part of a strong commitment to excellence in the winemaking art, reflected in the quality of all Lakeridge wines and in the dedication of the people who make them. The original American wine. From our southern heritage of the native muscadine grape, this is the legacy Lakeridge Winery continues. Rooted in history and passed on through family tradition.
At the end of the day, whenever I'm able to have a few minutes and look out over these hills around here and see that sunset across that lake, there's probably not a prettier place in the world as far as I'm concerned, and I've seen a fair amount of it. So we thoroughly enjoy our relationship here in Lake County.